Welcome to Chapter 9, The Voyage Through the Lifespan. I love this chapter because this chapter takes us from infancy into our elder years, and it looks at the different developmental milestones that we reach in each stage of our life and what the expectations are and what the theories say. It's just good stuff. So let's begin. During the months after conception, a single cell is formed by the sperm and the egg coming together, creating a zygote. The zygote multiplies and it becomes 2 cells, and then 4 cells, and then 8 cells, and so on as it grows into being a baby. So the period from conception to implantation is called the germinal stage. The embryonic stage lasts from implantation until about 8 weeks of development. This is when major organs are formed. The head grows first, and then everything else follows. By about the 7th week, the genetic code, the XY or XX, begins to develop, causing sex organs to differentiate. So if a Y sex organ is present, then testes will form and begin to produce male sex hormones. The embryo is contained in the amniotic sac in the mom's uterus, and this helps maintain an even temperature for the embryo. So until birth, the embryo exchanges nutrients and waste with the mother through the placenta. And the embryo and the placenta are connected through the umbilical cord. The fetal stage lasts from the beginning of the 3rd month until birth. Newborn boys average about 7.5 pounds, and newborn girls weigh about 7 pounds at birth. So the development process moves from zygote to embryo to fetus. And you can see in this picture, in the first photo, is the end of the first trimester, and this is when all of the major organs have been formed and it's complete. And fingers and toes are fully formed, and the sex of the fetus can be seen visually. The second photo is the midway point between conception and birth, and this is when the fetus is covered with fine hair called lanugo. The lanugo hair protects the baby's delicate skin from being damaged by the fluid in the amniotic sac. Once babies are born, there's a dramatic development that occurs, both cognitively and physically. During infancy, which is the first 2 years of childhood, there's dramatic gains in height and weight. Babies usually double their weight in the first 5 months and triple it by their first birthday. Their height usually increases by about 10 inches in the first year. Grasping is one of the baby's reflexes, and reflexes are simple inborn responses that are listed by simple stimuli. So they're essential for survival, and they occur automatically. So that means we do it without even thinking about them. So newborn children don't know that it's necessary to eat to survive, but they still turn their heads toward the stimuli, which could be the nipple on the breast or the bottle's nipple, in order to eat. And this term is called rooting, when they are looking for what to suck on. Newborns use the withdrawal reflex to avoid painful stimuli. When they startle, which is also called the Moro reflex, they draw out their legs and arch their backs in response to sudden noises, bumps, or loss of support while being held. Another reflex is grasping. They grasp objects that are pressed against the palms of their hands. And then they can fan their toes when the soles of their feet are stimulated through the Babinski reflex. Their motor development is a progression from simple acts like simply lifting their head to running around. And you can see in this chart, age-wise, how babies start developing from lying down to being up and fully walking. So children go through a sequence that includes rolling over, sitting up, crawling, creeping, walking, and then eventually running. Although there are kids that never even crawl, they just go straight from sitting up to walking. Newborn babies spend about 16 hours a day sleeping, and they don't have much opportunity to learn about the world. Yet they can perceive the world reasonably well after birth. Within a couple of days, infants can follow moving light with their eyes. By 3 months, they can discriminate most colors. And the visual preference for infants are measured by the amount of time, and this is called fixation time, they spend looking at one stimulus instead of another. So there was a research experience done by Dr. France with 2-month-old infants, and he found that they preferred visual stimuli that resembled the human face to newsprint. Research shows that neonates prefer their mother's voice to those of other women, but they don't show a preference for their father's voice. So cognitive development in children talks about the way that children mentally represent the world and think about the world. Piaget's cognitive development theory is a major theory in understanding how children learn. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory explains how children develop cognitively through their interaction with others, and Kohlberg's theory of moral development looks at how children develop their sense of right and wrong. So under Piaget's theory, we have schemas, and schemas are things that we already know. This is information we have already organized to make sense of the world. So assimilation occurs when we find something new, we have a new stimuli, and then we fit it into what we already know. We make it fit into our schema. Accommodation, though, changes our schema. We again encounter something new, and then all of a sudden we have to change what we know based on what we have learned. So an example of if you grow up in a small town and you have a perception of what certain groups of people are like, when you go out and meet them, you might change your schema, your understanding of what they're like, and that's accommodation, because you're having to change what you thought you knew and make it fit with the new information that you now have. Assimilation, on the other hand, would simply be you have this new information and you're going to make it fit into what you already know. Piaget was a stage theorist. That means that he felt that we developed cognitively in stages. So once you master one stage, you move on to the next stage. And he had 4 major stages of cognitive development. They were sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. In the sensory motor stage, the newborn is capable of assimilating new information, but only to existing reflexes, only to what is already organized in the infant's mind, so such as the rooting and sucking reflexes. But by the time the infant reaches the age of 1 month, the baby's already showing behavior that's done on purpose. The baby's repeating behavior patterns that are pleasurable, such as sucking his hand or her hand, turning towards something that is stimulating, and really discovering the world. At 3 or 4 months old, babies may be fascinated with their own hands and legs, and you'll see babies just really staring at their hands endlessly because they're just fascinating. And then they become increasingly interested in the environment, such as shaking a rattle and the sound that it makes. And at this age, their behavior becomes purposeful. They start doing things on purpose to create something. Between the ages of 4 and 8 months, they start looking at cause and effect relationships. So throwing something down and the sound it makes, or knocking something off their tray and watching it fall. By the age of 12 months, they develop object permanence. And object permanence is where infants realize if you take something out of their sight, it still exists. So before this time, if you took something away, then they forgot about it. But about the age of 12 months, if you hide a toy, they know that there's still a toy somewhere, so they go looking for it. In the pre-operational stage, children start using words and symbols to represent objects and the relationships among them. So one thing that occurs in this stage is egocentrism. So they can't understand that other people don't see things the same way they do. When my children were little, they'd be sitting in the back seat in their car seats, and I'd be driving, and they'd be looking at a book, asking me what's on the book, what the picture was. And they didn't understand that because they could see the book, I couldn't see the book. So that is egocentrism. Children at this age also show animism, and that's where they attribute life to physical objects like the sun and the moon, or their stuffed animals. They believe that they're actually alive. And they also have artificialism, where they believe environmental events like rain and thunder are human inventions. So children in this stage start developing conservation, and that's where they begin to understand if I take a glass of water and pour it into a large bowl, that's the same amount of water. Even though it looks different, even though it's in a different container, it still remains to be the same amount of water, and that's conservation for children. And at this stage, moral judgment is one-dimensional. So if somebody does something accidentally, like maybe drops and breaks a vase, even if it was an accident, even if it wasn't intentional, children believe they should receive the same punishment as somebody who breaks something on purpose. And this is called objective responsibility. Children leave the pre-operational stage and move into the concrete operational stage at about the age of 7. And this stage lasts until about the age of 12. And this is where children begin to show the capacity for adult logic. So they're capable of decentration. They can center on 2 problems at once. They don't just have to focus on one area. At this stage, they have subjective moral judgment. So at this point, they can look at the motives of the wrongdoers as well as the amount of damage done. It's not just a complete black and white, you did this, this is your punishment. They begin to look at the intention. And concrete operational children understand the laws of conservation. So they are aware of reversibility. So they can see that many things can be reversed or undone and restored to their previous condition. Children in this stage are less egocentric. They're able to take on the roles of others and to view the world from other people's perspective. And their own set of values begin to emerge during this stage. So Piaget's stages of cognitive development for children run from sensory-motor to pre-operational to concrete operational up to the age of 12. His last stage, the formal operational stage, begins at about age 12 and lasts until adulthood. And this is where adolescents start gaining the ability to think in abstract manner and by manipulating ideas in their head. And you can see this in the school system. When you get into middle school, the math becomes more abstract. And children that may have done really well in elementary school find that they struggle more in middle school and into high school because the ideas are more abstract and they're having to do more things mentally in their head. And so a lot of times children can struggle in this stage with learning. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory focuses on how culture and children's interaction with adults helps with their learning. So the zone of proximal development is where children are able to learn with the help of somebody who's more skilled. And scaffolding is providing that temporary assistance as children learn to master things. So think of scaffolding as a bridge. A child's trying to learn something, and the adult, the teacher, the parent, or another adult in their life is providing a bridge to help them reach their goal. And once they're able to cross that bridge and reach their goal and master it, then they can be more independent. Kohlberg is also a stage theorist, and he focused on the moral development of children. And he used stories in his research to measure children's moral reasoning. And he felt that moral reasoning followed a specific sequence. And the first was the pre-conventional level. In this level, if you're good and you're obedient, then you can avoid punishment, and you're also able to help others when you're being good. In the conventional level, children do things just by standards of what is right or wrong, pleasing people, meeting the needs and expectations of others, and judgments that they have are based on the rules that maintain social order. So the rules of their culture, the rules of their religion, that's how they determine right or wrong or how they should behave. And at the post-conventional level, that's the highest level, and not everybody achieves this level. Judgment is based on personal conscience. So even though my religion might say this is wrong, do I really think this is wrong? Should I do something instead? And that's the post-conventional level. Erikson was also a stage theorist, and he had 8 stages of psychosocial development, and the book covers the first 4, so those are the 4 we're going to look at. Trust versus mistrust, this is from birth to age 1, and this is where infants must learn that adults can be trusted. So adults need to meet the child's basic needs for survival because they're completely dependent on their caregivers. And when they have caregivers who are responsive and sensitive to the infant's needs, they help their baby develop a sense of trust, and the baby will see the world as safe and predictable. Unresponsive caregivers who don't meet the baby's needs can create feelings of anxiety, fear, and mistrust, and these babies may see the world as unpredictable. And if infants are treated cruelly during this time and their needs aren't met, they might grow up with a sense of mistrust for people in the world. The next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt, and this is around ages 1 to 3. And this is where babies begin to explore their world. They learn that they can control their actions and act on the environment to get results. They begin to show preferences for certain things in the environment, such as food and toys and clothing. Their main task is to resolve the issue of autonomy versus shame and doubt by trying to be more independent. This is the me do it stage. This is where a 2-year-old might want to choose her own clothes and dress herself. And even though the outfits may not match or they may not be appropriate, provided that given the ability to make these decisions will help develop her independence. But if she's not allowed to dress as she thinks she wants to, she begins to doubt her abilities, and this could lead to low self-esteem and feelings of shame. Initiative versus guilt is ages 3 to 6, and this is when children are capable of initiating activities and asserting control over the world through their social interactions and play. So preschool children must resolve the task of initiative versus guilt by learning to plan and achieve goals or interacting with others. And this often is done on the playground when you see children play and how they play with each other. This is their initiating activities and learning to explore their limits. And they can develop self-confidence and a sense of purpose if they're allowed the freedom to start mastering their environment. Children who are unsuccessful in this stage may develop feelings of guilt if they have over-controlling parents. And then industry versus inferiority. This is during the elementary school stage of around ages 6 to 12. And children begin to compare themselves with their peers once they start school, and they start seeing how they measure up. And they either develop a sense of pride and accomplishment in what they can do with their work and their sports activities, or they start feeling inferior and inadequate because they don't feel like they measure up to other children. And if children don't learn to get along with others, or they have negative experiences at home or with their peers, they might develop an inferiority complex that will continue into adolescence and adulthood. Attachment is an important part of development in childhood, and this is when children develop an emotional tie between another person, and this is defined by Dr. Ainsworth. And behaviors that define attachment include the attempts to maintain contact and the signs of anxiety when separated. So think about children with their parents. They want to be with their parents. They are very attached to them, and when their parents leave, they might show some anxiety of being separated from their parents. Dr. Ainsworth conducted research to see how well infants attached to their caregivers, and she defined 3 types of attachment. One was secure attachment, where securely attached infants were a little upset when their moms left, but when the moms came back, they were very excited to see their moms, and they ran to their moms for comfort. The avoidant attachment is where infants showed less distress when their mothers left. They didn't really care, and they were willing to play by themselves without being upset. And when their moms returned, they actually ignored their moms. And then ambivalent resistant attachment is when the infants were very upset when their moms left, but then when the moms came back, they didn't really seem to care much, or they might push their mom away if she tried to hold them. So we want a secure attachment for all infants, where they're very attached to their parents, and they might be upset when their parents leave, but then they're okay, they can adjust, but when the parents come back, they're excited to see them and they run toward them. There's a famous experiment on attachment that was conducted by Harry Harlow, and his experiment suggests that skin contact may be more important than learning experiences. And he found that infant rhesus monkeys that were reared without mothers or companions became attached to pieces of cloth in their cages, and they'd prefer to cling to the cloth rather than go to the wire object where they could eat. So the skin-to-skin contact in humans also has proven to be very important, and it increases the levels of oxytocin, and that's connected with cuddling, caring, and the development of healthy parent-infant relationships. Parenting styles influence child development as well, and Bowren identified 4 styles of parenting. One was authoritative parents, and these are parents that are strict and demand mature behavior, but they also explain why they have their rules and they offer to help. Authoritarian parents have strict guidelines about what's right and wrong, and they demand that their children follow those guidelines regardless of what the children believe. Permissive parents are generally easygoing with their children. They're warm and supportive, but they're poor at communicating, and they don't set a lot of boundaries for their kids. And uninvolved parents tend to leave children on their own. They make few demands, and they're just not involved in their children's life. So authoritative parents have been shown to have children that have greater self-esteem, social competence, and achievement and motivation than other children, as opposed to children who have parents that were in the other 3 categories. Adolescence is a stage of development where more changes occur during this time than any other time in life except for infancy. And this is an interesting stage because you have puberty occurring, which is creating many changes both cognitively and physically and emotionally. But then also this is a stage where kids become teenagers and start assuming some adult responsibilities. And so the changes can be a lot or they can be minor, and it can be, a seamless time for some kids and a really challenging time for others. For the physical development of adolescence, one of the most noticeable things we see is a growth spurt, and that lasts about 2 to 3 years. And then eventually height and weight start leveling off. But some adolescents grow about 8 to 12 inches during this time. Now, puberty begins with the appearance of secondary sex characteristics. So this can be the deepening of voice in males, the rounding of the breast in females, and the start of the menstrual cycles for girls. The brain continues developing in adolescence, and especially if you have adolescents who spend hours a day practicing the piano or the violin, their changes in their learning actually increases the thickness of the parts of the cerebral cortex that are being used. Yet compared to adults, the frontal lobe of adolescence, where we make decisions, control impulses, are less active than adults. And their amygdalas, the part of the brain that is involved with emotion, including fear, are actually more active. Adolescence involves Piaget's formal operation stage, and it shows how cognition is maturing. So people during this stage are able to classify, have more logical thought, they're able to hypothesize, they can think about ideas and objects and classify them into groups, and they can have abstract thinking. So prior to this, people are only able to think in concrete terms, but starting in adolescence, they can start thinking abstractly, wonder about the world, questioning why people do what they do, become more idealistic. And they can have some hypothetical situations and then set up situations to test their hypotheses to see, if I do this, what will happen? If I say this to this person, what will be the response? Adolescents are very egocentric, so they demand that people accept their logic without really considering any exceptions or practical problems with the way they're viewing the world. They tend to have an imaginary audience, believing that people are as concerned with what they are thinking about as they are. And they also believe that their feelings and ideas are special and that they're invulnerable, and they don't understand people who don't agree with them or who don't see the specialness of them. During adolescence, we see the emergence of Kohlberg's post-conventional level of moral reasoning, and that's where judgment is based on one's values. No longer are they doing something simply because they were told. So stage 5 for Kohlberg says that laws are made from agreed procedures, but exceptions can occur. So it's no longer black and white, this is what we do. Adolescents can start seeing reasons to maybe not follow the laws. And stage 6 demands adherence to laws to universal ethical principle. And this is where the idealism comes into play that often occurs during adolescence. So during this time, teenagers will spend less time with their parents and more time with their peers. They continue to need their parents and love them and respect them, but they don't want to spend as much time with them as they do their peers. And there's often a lot of conflict during this time, but there are times where there really is no conflict. It's a seamless transition. But because adolescents are wanting more independence and to be considered more of an adult, and parents are not necessarily ready for their kids to have that independence, or they don't trust the judgments of their kids, it can create some conflict. And peers become more influential and more supportive of each other. This is the 5th stage of American psychosocial development, ego identity. And this is where adolescents start deciding or getting a sense of who they are and what they believe in. The next stage is emerging adulthood. And this typically is between the ages of 18 and 25. This is when adolescents go off to college. Previously, in older generations, it used to be that you went from age 18 to becoming an adult, getting married, and having children. But now, more affluent nations allow adolescents to slowly emerge into adulthood. So during this time, young adults are figuring out more of their identity. They're figuring out more what they want in relationships. It's some times of instability. They're focusing on themselves. They're looking at the possibilities. And now that we know that the frontal cortex doesn't fully develop until the age of 25, many young adults during this time can't really figure out what they want to do until about 25. And those are considered late bloomers. And even if teenagers go to college thinking this is absolutely what I want to do, I want to major in computer science, while they're in college, they may realize, no, this isn't really who I am. I really want to major in theater. And they start trying on different hats, so to speak, to figure out what is the best fit for them and truly to try to understand who they are and identify what they want for themselves. Adulthood is the next stage of development. In early adulthood, we have peak physical development. So this is when people are at their height of sensory sharpness, strength, reaction time, cardio fitness. And this is actually when people have time to work out. Once they get married and have kids, and that time becomes more limited. So this is a point where they can just really focus on themselves and take care of themselves. In middle adulthood, we start seeing people have less strength and coordination and stamina as they did in their 20s and 30s. There's a gradual physical decline, but it's minor, and it may not really even be noticeable unless somebody in their 40s is trying to compete against somebody in their 20s, and then they'll see some of the differences that have occurred. Women during this time will experience menopause and no longer be able to have children, and this can be a challenging time for some women as they realize that their childbearing age is over. And for other women, it can be freeing, where they know that now they can really just start focusing more on themselves. And then in late adulthood, we have continuing changes in the body, where bones become more brittle, skin becomes less elastic, and there is a slower response time when doing activities. In early adulthood, young adults tend to see themselves as independent members of society, and this is Erik Erikson's stage of intimacy versus isolation. So this is a time where young adults are trying to form relationships, thinking about finding the one, the person they're going to spend the rest of their lives with, and start worrying that they may never find this person and they may end up more isolated. It's also a challenge as young adults graduate from college to really find peers to do things with, because they're used to having their college classmates, their roommates, just always with them, being able to do things. And now they might be living in an apartment by themselves and working, and it's more of a struggle to meet people and to find people they really want to spend time with. Middle adulthood is Erik Erikson's stage of generativity versus stagnation. So generativity is adults who do things that they believe are worthwhile. And stagnation is where things just seem to stop, and it damages self-esteem, and they start thinking, is this all there is to my life? Am I not going to grow anymore? Am I not going to have a different career? Is this really the same person I'm going to be married to the rest of my life? And it can cause some self-esteem issues, and it can cause some depression. People during this stage might undergo a midlife crisis and an empty nest syndrome as kids are moving out of the home, going off to college, and the adults who spent their last 20 years raising children all of a sudden find themselves with nothing else to focus on because all of their focus has been on kids. And it can be a struggle to transition back to just focusing on themselves and figuring out what they like and what they want to do with their lives. This is also the sandwich generation, because adults during this stage will still have children that they're helping to launch into independence, but then they also now might have their own parents who are needing more support and more care, and they feel stuck between the two generations. In the late adulthood, Erikson considers this the ego integrity versus despair. And many individuals in this late adulthood stage continue to be creative and also have a firm sense of who they are and what they stand for. But for Erikson's stage, he believed that ego integrity derived from wisdom, which can be defined as expert knowledge about the meaning of life, and also being able to balance one's own needs and those of others, and trying to become even more developed in their behavior and their achievement. And Erikson also believed that wisdom helped people in this stage to accept their lifespan as occurring, and at a certain point as being limited when they understand that they have more years behind them than they actually do ahead of them. With good eating habits and physical activity, people in this stage can continue to enjoy good physical health. They can continue to be active and develop a social network of friends. And without any serious cognitive impairments, then they can continue living life fully. So go spend time with your grandparents. Let them know that you appreciate them, that you love them. Give them that social connection they might need. And also hug your parents. Tell them you appreciate all that they've done for you and that you are on your way to independence. All right, everyone, that's it for this chapter. I hope you have a great week and contact me with questions. Bye-bye.